Good day, dear friends! This is Jinky Rayo from the Philippines. Buongiorno! Today I'll be doing a short demo about Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy in celebration of his 700th death anniversary. This is in conjunction with UrbinoInAcquerello's celebration. Join me! I always start my work with an inspiration in mind, whether a certain flower or an object. In this subject, since it is an event that celebrates Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, a fictional poetry book with so many biblical references and characters, I instead paid homage to the famous Gustave Dorés' famous artwork titled Beatific Vision. This is Dante's final journey in his search for life's meaning in his famous fictional book found in Canto 33. I start my work with a light sketch, not too many details, just to give me a perspective of what I wanted to look like afterwards. Now I am doing a sketch of the two human forms, the story's protagonist, Dante. In this scene, Dante is being accompanied by Beatrice, his spiritual guide. They were in the heavens envisioning the glory of God. The original work had the image of God in a spiritual form confronting Dante and Beatrice. I chose not to include that image because I felt I could never do justice of God's glory revealed in my work. God is always revealed in the Bible as spirit, a blinding, bright light, or a marvelous source of light that is beyond words for description. So I will depict God's glory in this piece as a bright light emanating from the far left above of the paper instead. Because this is a quick demo, I use a masking tape to cover the two human forms to protect the whites of the paper. Be sure to press it tight to avoid seepage of pigment underneath. I will start my process here by wetting the surfaces surrounding the two human forms. Not too wet, just to make the paper pliable, so not to absorb the pigment when I drop the colors, the paint on the paper. I'm mixing my pigment for the clouds. I'm going to use my big mop brush. Now I'm dropping some light mixtures of cadmium yellow and cadmium orange. That is the undertone for my skies and clouds. It is a random dropping of pigment, but yet I'm envisioning where it's going to be when the clouds are formed. This is going to be a very quick work. Now I'm dropping cobalt blues randomly where I think the clouds should swirl. It doesn't look much, but it will come very nice later as the colors mix themselves on the paper. To deepen the tonal value of the clouds, I add some phthalo blue with a mixture of titanium white on the edges of the cobalt blue pigment. This will serve as the shadows or the darker tones of the clouds. And sometimes I lift pigment with a damp brush. Now I'm using lemon yellow to highlight the bright light in the upper left corner. A little bit of cadmium orange to give some depth of those bright light. Now I'm lifting some pigment to maintain the soft edges of the clouds. Now the clouds is having its form. I'm doing my painting here very quickly while the paper is still damp, so to avoid hard edges. Now you have to assess your next step, whether you need to add more pigment or to lessen some. Now I have to use my dryer to quicken the drying of the paper. Whenever I see some stray brush hairs, I use a very dry brush with very thin tip to pick it up, so not to disturb the paper and the pigment. I'm using the cool air of this blow dryer so not to dry the paper too much than what I intend to. Now we're ready to paint the human forms. I always hold a kitchen towel paper on my left hand every time I paint, so that to control the dropping of some excess water from my brush. Now I'm doing some pencil sketches on the human form for more of the details, for the folds of the fabric, of the hair, so that I will know where to terminate each color. Now, before I drop in any pigment to the human forms as my main subject, or in any subject, I always wet the paper so to control the intensity of the pigment's penetration in the paper. That gives me time to adjust the pigment the way I wanted. Because sometimes I felt that the color is too strong or it needs more pigment. That's the way I want it. Dante here is depicted as wearing a red garb, but I don't want it to be a very bright red, hence the dropping first of a red orange hue to diffuse the redness of the pigment that I will apply later. Now I'm adding the red hue or red pigment or red color. I am very careful in depicting where the folds are in Dante's garb. I'm using nickel azo on Beatrice's hair. Just a little bit, not too much, so that it will not overpower the subject. Beatrice is wearing a white gown, so I'll just be using a pale cobalt blue as its first wash and apply deeper one for the folds of the cloth and the shadow. I'm not putting too much detail on her hair, just some suggestion that it has curls on it. I'm very careful in painting the facial features of Beatrice so that there will be a right scale on where her mouth and eyes and nose are. Now I'm putting darker values for the shadow underneath her hair. Now it's almost done. So that's it. Now my signature. Sometimes I go back on my subject, especially if I notice that the pigments has lightened, because watercolor is like that. It lightens after the pigment is dry. Now my signature! It's done. Now that it's done, I hope you enjoyed our short video. Thank you again, UrbinoInAcquerello organizers, my friend Soha Khalil, and all your team. Buongiorno!